there is a larger geopolitical play here.
The next 2 centuries are going to be centuries of the seas and of space, both outer space and inner space or cyberspace. Sometimes I think that there are, as many neighbors as there are hoods. We have our problematic. It is that there are extra regional powers, particularly China.
So the National Green Tribunal has green-lighted an 80,000 crore project called the Great Nicobar Project. That's what the media refers it as. What is this Great Nicobar Project, and geostrategically, how important is it for India?
Identification of those warships, the tracking of those merchant ships, the prosecution of warships and merchant ships, should it be necessary, becomes childishly easy.
26 already ordered, the Indian Navy. Now the Indian Navy wants 31 more. So, sir, 26 plus 31 is for the Indian Navy and for the Indian Air Force, sir. Already 36. We have 2 squadrons, Ambala and Hashimara, and then 114 more.
The reason why we need greater numbers is because in terms of our interests being protected with only 2 aircraft carriers, you will need another one. You will need a one after that. And you need to have standardization of your aircraft. And therefore, the increase in numbers, and the reason I'm saying you need one more, even though you're sardonically smiling, is because
I'm absolutely with you, because I've been wanting you to say this for a long time. We signed this trade deal with the US, sir, and immediately afterwards, we come to know that the Indian Navy is placing an order for 6 more Poseidons. So we already have 12.
What is our greatest nightmare? Our greatest nightmare is that there will be Chinese SSNs floating about in the Indian Ocean that we can do little about.
Ladies and gentlemen, when you think of the Indian Navy, what comes to mind is aircraft carriers, destroyers, submarines. But there is a larger geopolitical play here. And there is so much happening in the Navy today. We have with us Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan. He's the Director General of the National Maritime Foundation. It is India's premier maritime think tank. Sir, Jai Hind, and a very warm welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. Jai Hind to you too.
So there have been massive budget allocations for the Indian Navy, and the Chief of Naval Staff very recently said that every 40 days we're going to have a new warship. Now apparently it's coming down further, and the Navy is not happy with 40 days and they say we want more warships. What is fueling this urgency, sir? Because whenever, we discussed about various wars and all that, sir. 1971, I think especially 1971, even in Kargil, but specifically 71, I think Navy had a fantastic role to play, sir. Eastern Seaboard, Western Seaboard, I mean, they lit up Karachi, sir. And Chittagong, the aircraft carriers and all of that, that is documented history. But then people stopped talking about it. Suddenly there is this huge urgency with the Navy, and I'm talking from an outsider's point of view, because you would know what is happening in the Navy and has been happening over a period of decades. But from an outsider's perspective, what has changed? What has supercharged this urgency?
Okay, so what is actually driving this whole business is not really competition against one or another power. For example, we're not really trying to meet China's threat ship for ship. What we're trying to do as a country is build an economic transformation. And if you want to do that, then you are trying to move from a $3 trillion or a $4 trillion economy to a $30 trillion economy by 2047. And for that to happen, you have to lean outwards. And if you're going to lean outwards, then the ocean spaces are going to become increasingly important. In fact, the next 2 centuries are going to be centuries of the seas and of space, both outer space and inner space or cyberspace. And in the course of these 200 years, India is either going to be a space and a maritime power, or India is not going to be any kind of power at all. First of all, you need India. So the point you make is that you need an India that is assured by the army. The territorial integrity and the cartographic identity of India is assured by the army. Now that you've got India, you have to be able to propel India forward, and that requires maritime infrastructure, that requires maritime investment, that requires a change of mindset of the oceans being some distant place in which activities take place far away from the sight and minds of men, to an intrinsic place where things are going to happen. Now, flag and trade have an immediate and symbiotic relationship spanning millennia. And therefore, as India is progressing outwards, as India becomes a more powerful nation, we assume greater responsibilities. The requirement for mastering the trade aspects of our economy, because we are currently standing with a merchandise to trade GDP ratio, merchandise trade to GDP ratio of almost 30%. So if you are looking at 30% of your economy being driven by external trade, and if 90% of that trade goes by sea, you had better have the material wherewithal to protect that and to prevent it from being addressed adversely by anybody at all. So that's the major geopolitical, the geoeconomic driver. We live in a neighborhood which has. Sometimes I think that there are, as many neighbors as there are hoods. So it's very difficult for us to be able to manage this particular neighborhood. And it's not that the neighbors we have are problematic. It is that there are extra regional powers, particularly China, that are constantly entering this space. And the reason why China is doing that is because its economy is in even poorer shape than we thought it was. And therefore, their reliance upon external trade is high. Trade and flag are symbiotic, so you will see the Chinese Navy entering the Indian Ocean. What should we be doing at that point in time is something that we have to think of today, because there is about a 15-year gap between the time when you think of something to be done at sea, building a warship, and its actual commissioning. So coming to this 30 days. 30 days is true. And the reasons are three, I think. The first of them is that the government of India, which unfortunately is much vilified all the time, but in actual fact has finally got its defense acquisition process streamlined. Secondly, the number of ships that are being built on a given hull, the standardization and the run for that hull has moved from a standard of 3 ships of a given class to currently 7 ships, 9 ships, 12 ships. This allows shipyards to prepare better and to be able to deploy their resources more efficiently. And it results in this 40-day, 50-day kind of production of ships. Not all these 50 ships are going to be top-end warships, top-end combatants, but all of them are going to be combatants, and all of them are going to be crucial. Because we have a niche navy. We do not have a niche navy, because if you have a niche navy, you can get into an alliance with somebody else and say, okay, I'm going to do the anti-submarine stuff and you provide me the air power. But if the country is not going to go in for an alliance, and I think that's a good idea, then we have no option but to build a navy which is balanced in all respects. And therefore, you will need everything. You will need the aircraft carrier, as you said, and I'm a great proponent of it, having commanded one myself. You also need the submarines. What the aircraft carrier can do, the submarines can't, and vice versa. You also need the destroyers, you need the frigates, you need the ground water ships, you need the minesweepers, you need the anti-submarine warfare. You need a navy. And if you want a navy, you need to be able to have this kind of production rate. Why didn't we have this particular navy consciousness in the country prior to the current period, notwithstanding the spectacular successes of 1971, is because as a mindset, we were continentally biased. This is a bit of a problem, because any maritime power, when there's a crisis brewing, the first question that is asked is, where are the carriers, or where is the navy? And then, where's the Air Force? And finally, you have, where's the Army? And the reason is because an army is the least calibratable of forces. You either insert your army or you don't. But you can insert the Navy and withdraw the Navy as you choose, without any loss of face, without any loss of national prestige. The Air Force, you can also do the same thing, but they can't stay there long enough because they have to battle gravity all the time. The Navy, however, is therefore the instrument of choice. Now, it's very odd that the country, India, has for many years, as you mentioned, the opposite view. That means first we insert the army, then we try and figure out, what should we now do? Do we have an Air Force? And then we put in air power, and then we finally ask each other, so in Navy, where you could have, and we then introduce the Navy. Now, either we're the only country in the world that does this. So either we know something that nobody else does, there is another alternative which is not so flattering. So that's what is the driver. Now, the fact that we have China and its shenanigans being played out in this area as well, So when we talk about trade, you must understand when we are talking about the Indo-Pacific frequently and not concentrating upon the Indian Ocean alone, it is because in the case of our trade, for example, once again, to continue with trade, if you look at the trade going through the Strait of Bab-el-Mandeb and the Gulf of Aden, you have approximately $320 billion worth of trade annually, Indian trade. And if that trade is impacted, obviously we're going to react.
Absolutely, sir.
On the other hand, going through the Strait of Malacca and east through the South China Sea, we have about 27% of all our trade, which means we're talking about something around 700 billion. So should we not be concerned with that? Should we only be looking at, the proximate area? Finally, there is also one other point, and that is that government has come to realize, and so has much of the populace, that you do not, navies and armies don't fight in the same way. Armies fight adjacent to one another, generally. Navies fight wherever the enemy is to be found. So if, for example, we were to be in conflict with Pakistan in the future, we would take on Pakistani trade wherever it is, whether it's in the Atlantic or it's in the Pacific or it's in the Indian Ocean. It wouldn't be that we are lobbing some missiles or some drones across a specific.
It's not geography specific, sir.
It's not geography specific in the same manner as is the case with
The
land fighting. Last point. So I know I said last point earlier, but look, for a long time we've been listening to people saying that we're not an expeditionary force, or the army is not an expeditionary force in India. It doesn't matter what you say. The Indian economy will drag you screaming and kicking into becoming an expeditionary power, because that's where your interests will be. And therefore, since navies are built to safeguard interests and not solely to protect against threat, your interests will determine your behavior, and your interests will determine the fact that your outlays of finance will go increasingly to the Navy.
So the National Green Tribunal has green-lighted an 80,000 crore project called the Great Nicobar Project. That's what the media refers it as. What is this Great Nicobar Project, and geostrategically, how important is it for India?
Well, it encompasses two basic elements. One is the Galathea Bay project, which is the mega port being built up in the Great Nicobar Islands as a transshipment port, which will enable us to then make sure that the monies that we are currently expending on ports such as Colombo and on Singapore and Port Klang, etc., is now going to be concentrated within India, within the Bay of Bengal, within the Arabian Sea in general, through the development of the Galathea Bay mega port. The second element of this project is the Navy's expansion, and there, as people have often said, the Andaman and Nicobar Islands together sit across the mouth of the Strait of Malacca. And therefore, whatever control you have over the Strait of Malacca is contingent upon what degree of power you are able to possess, and then, if you choose, are able to project going eastwards of that. And since we have every belief that or every apprehension that particular situation in that area will become grimmer, this is what is driving this particular project. Its geostrategic significance is enormous. It is the single biggest enabler of Indian power projection as well as Indian power consolidation, not only in the maritime space, but in all three domains.
So do you think, sir, you mentioned the Malacca, do you think the Malacca choke, as we refer it as, that will be, China has a certain trade coming through the Malacca Straits, and you can actually choke it off and therefore put tremendous economic pressure on China? Do you think that is possible, sir, given our capabilities? And do you think that is something that the Indian Navy aspires to do? It's part of its power projection. It's part of its entire plan, sir.
Well, it's like this, that the Malacca Strait is a strait for international navigation, but it is geographically choked. And so it's a bit like Horatius on the bridge. 3 men are adequate to cover the width of the bridge. Then no matter how many forces you are being pitted against you, these 3 should be able to hold 3 at a time.
Yes.
It's quite a lot like the Chumbi Valley.
Sure.
Okay, so now in the Strait of Malacca, the intention is for nobody to choke the Strait of Malacca. What happens is that if you're going to be using the Strait of Malacca and the trade that you've got, as well as your warships, are going to come through the Strait of Malacca, then identification of those warships, the tracking of those merchant ships, the prosecution of warships and merchant ships, should it be necessary, becomes childishly easy compared to the wider expanses if such choke points were not to exist. So can we actually choke the Strait of Malacca? No, and nobody can. But can we pick our targets through the Strait of Malacca? Yes, most certainly we can, and that is what the Indian Navy will intend to do in the future.
Now, sir, I'd like to draw your attention to the Rafales. 26, the Indian Navy has already ordered. I'm talking about the Rafale M. Now, news comes in that the Indian Navy wants 31 more, sir. So, this is 26 plus 31. And now, as far as the Air Force is concerned, sir, 36 initially. So for the Navy, sir, again, just for our audience, 26 already ordered, the Indian Navy. Now, the Indian Navy wants 31 more. So, sir, 26 plus 31 is for the Indian Navy and for the Indian Air Force, sir. Already 36, sir. We have 2 squadrons, Ambala and Hashimara, and then 114 more. So, what is the Indian Navy doing, sir?
Okay, so the Indian Navy is conscious of the fact that you need air power. Now, who provides the air power is not important, but you need air power on 2 components. You need air power here and you need air power now. The now component cannot be provided by anybody else, but the here component you can provide from shore-based air power by means of mid-air refueling or bases, etc. So air power per se, it has these 2 components, and it depends therefore upon where your interests lie. If they lie close to the coast, then maybe you can manage in some other fashion. If your interests lie at distances from your coast which are beyond the ability of shore-based air power to cover, then you have to have integral air power. That, first of all, defines why we need significant aircraft, on-board significant aircraft carriers, to be able to do this particular protection of your national interests. The reason why we need greater numbers is because A, the attrition on board ships is higher than attrition on land, and B, that the sheer number requirements, we are not going to be satisfied as a country in terms of our interests being protected with only 2 aircraft carriers. You will need another one. You will need a one after that. And you need to have standardization of your aircraft. And therefore, the increase in numbers, and the reason I'm saying you need one more and one more, even though you're sardonically smiling, is because
I'm absolutely with you, because I've been wanting you to say this for a long time.
Because the aircraft carriers that you have are going to have a radius of control of approximately 700 odd miles. And if you want a 700-mile de facto control over a given sea area, you better have some air power of some consequence. And therefore, the number of aircraft carriers will inevitably go up. It might not go up right now. It might take another 2 years, but it will happen simply because your interests, it is your interests that dictate all this. Where are your economic interests? What is the threat to those economic interests is a secondary question. Even if there was no threat to the economic interests, you still need to protect them. And therefore, the business of additional Rafales is simply because we, in our assessment, and the Air Force in its assessment, believes this to be a state-of-the-art aircraft. And the fact that we are going to standardize it across 2 services means that maintenance lines, overhaul lines, repair lines will become that much easier. As far as the Navy is concerned, the requirement of standardizing an airframe is as important as the requirement of standardizing a hull. That's the reason.
I was not going to ask you a question on aircraft carriers, but this is irresistible, sir, and I'll have to with your permission. Do we have the capacity and the capability? You said 800 miles of ocean, sir, one aircraft carrier. But I'm sure this will exponentially increase if it's a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. Can India build a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier? Does India have the technology, the wherewithal, the expertise? Can they do it?
Short answer, yes. When you build an aircraft carrier, there's a rough rule of thumb that equates the displacement of the carrier with the number of aircraft it carries. Earlier, it used to be for every 1,000 tons of aircraft carrier, one aircraft. So if you remember Virat, it was about 28,000 tons. It carried about 30 aircraft. Today, you have the aircraft are heavier, and therefore this ratio changes to maybe 1.5, that is 1,500 tons, one aircraft. Now, if you build an aircraft carrier of more than 65,000 displacement tons, then you are going to require propulsion mechanisms which are no longer going to be efficient if you choose either diesel or gas or any combination thereof. You will therefore have no option beyond 65,000 tons but to go in for nuclear propulsion. Can India build a nuclear propelled aircraft carrier? Well, India is building SSBNs which are much more compact.
Yes.
And so, of course, we can. The ability to build this, the technological skills, the engineering skills, the manufacturing skills are all in place. Over time, the cost effectiveness will be massive, but the initial costs will be high. India cannot afford to be like the cat in the Shakespearean adage, which wants the fish but doesn't want to get its paws wet. So the risks that that a country needs to take will be taken. And I see that this government in particular is not risk averse. It is not risk prone, but it is not risk averse. It's not afraid. And this is the single largest feature that you need, which we often call political will. So I think that the advent of a nuclear aircraft carrier is a certainty. We can discuss or debate the time frame.
So many people have said, we don't need another aircraft carrier. None of them were from the Navy, sir.
I want to tell you something, though, is off the question and answer thing. But look, I have never met a naval officer who's telling the other service how they should deploy their forces.
No,
I'm only astonished from time to time that somebody else decides to tell the Navy how and which ships and which platforms the Navy should use.
Most of these people are journalists or from think tanks, sir. And
think tanks need to think.
Yes. And they would go ahead and say, no, in today's day and age, there are hypersonic missiles and one missile comes, it'll sink an aircraft carrier, which is not true because aircraft carrier is an ecosystem, sir.
Even if it was true, tell me one thing. If you have an S-400, can it shoot down an F-35? Yes. Can an F-35 destroy an S-400? Yes. So should the conclusion be that one of us doesn't build F-35s and the other doesn't build S-400s? What about the infantry? If you're an infantry soldier and I'm an infantry soldier, I have a carbine, you have a carbine, can you kill me? Yep. Can I kill you? Yep. So is there an existential threat upon you? Yes. Is there an existential threat upon me? Yes. Does that mean that one of us shouldn't invest in infantry soldiers? There's some logical flaw in this.
Music to my ears, sir. Music to my ears. We signed this trade deal with the US, sir, and immediately afterwards, we come to know that the Indian Navy is placing an order for 6 more Poseidons. So we already have 12. What is this platform? What does this platform do? Why is it important? People say reconnaissance, anti-submarine, but it's an extremely sophisticated and complex system, and people say the finest of its kind anywhere in the world that the Indian Navy is fielding right now. So what exactly is a Poseidon? What does the Poseidon do?
Well, the Poseidon is a fixed-wing, long-range anti-submarine warfare and patrol aircraft. It provides for reconnaissance, but more importantly, it provides for area ASW. What is our greatest nightmare? Our greatest nightmare is that there will be Chinese SSNs floating about in the Indian Ocean that we can do little about. Now, the addressal of that nightmare requires 2 factors. Number one, we need to find and identify choke points through which we can identify the ingress and egress. And secondly, we need to be able to have platforms that can maintain track and surveillance and track of these kind of platforms. This is what the P-8Is enable you to do. And therefore, the more you have, the better it is, because this is the platform which will enable you to maintain situational awareness over the entire maritime space that you are interested in.
So now, you see, it's understood that Navy is national power projection at the widest possible scale. And they said that people often say that an aircraft carrier is the final arbiter of a nation's foreign policy. Now, what's happening here is India, Japan, and Indonesia are carrying out a trilateral exercise in the Andaman areas. Is this, or would China feel a little bit jittery because all of these three countries have border issues with China, sir? Japan is under threat, Indonesia is under threat. India is obviously, sir, they're pushing in the Himalayas. We've managed to push them back, but there is a threat.
Sure.
So when these three countries, which have a common threat perception, and here I'm speaking specifically about China, when they exercise, does it send a signal to Beijing?
I certainly hope so. It does. It does. Every country is carefully monitoring the signaling by every other country. And in the case of China, one of the reasons, incidentally, that China says that it has a Malacca dilemma, which was your question about the Malacca choke, is because, I mean, why don't you hear Japan saying that we have a Malacca dilemma? Why don't you ever hear South Korea saying that we have a Malacca dilemma? Although their energy flows are exactly through the same passage. It's because China doesn't have friends. We have friends. And therefore, if your best friends are Pakistan and North Korea, I don't think you need enemies. But coming back to the question that you've asked, yes, of course, it is signaling. And it is signaling not necessarily, we're not necessarily signaling aggressive intent to China. We're signaling resolve. We're signaling to China that please don't try and think that you can pick us off one by one. We are not alone in our belief in our own value systems, and if you wish to impose your value systems upon us, there is likely to be some resistance, and this is the manifestation of that. So whether those countries are exercising in a given area or we are conducting exercises in the Persian Gulf, the signaling is massive and correct and constant. The problem with strategic signaling is only this, that the signal you are sending out may not always be the signal that is received. Therefore, you need to reinforce your signaling as best as you can. This is what we're
Chinese whispers again, sir.
Chinese whispers, of course.
So this is my last question, and what I would request you to do is give me a slightly detailed answer, because I've had a lot of questions on this point, and this is about unmanned systems. So Prime Minister Modi goes to the White House, he signs a deal for 31 drones from General Atomics, and it's like $5 billion or something like that. Navy is already using Sea Guardians. There are other unmanned systems that the Navy is massively investing in, and the Navy says that, okay, this is the future of warfare apart from other factors. What exactly is the Indian Navy doing as far as unmanned systems are concerned, sir?
Okay, so this whole business of unmanned versus crewed systems, now it's called crewed and uncrewed.
Yes, sir.
Simply for gender sensitivity purposes. But every country is investing in uncrewed systems, because uncrewed systems enable you to have similar effects without necessarily risking human beings to the same degree. Now, this becomes critical for countries that have low manpower. If your manpower availability is very, very low, then you have no option but to find some system which doesn't require manpower. When I say manpower, I mean human power. For countries like us, this is not true. And therefore, for us, it is not that we don't have enough people and that our people are not willing to go out and, put their lives on the line, so to speak. For us, it's a matter of battlefield efficiencies. So can we get more efficiencies out of unmanned platforms than we could out of manned platforms? If we have a certain range of expenditures that are available to us for buying platforms, how best should we utilize that particular amount, and what can we do which can be farmed off to something else? That could lie in the area of mine clearance, it could lie in the area of surveillance, it could lie in the area of actual warfighting. So what is the Indian Navy doing? First of all, it's a mistake to think that the Indian Navy or India is actually leaning across desperately towards any given country, including the USA, the predators notwithstanding, for its unmanned system development. Today, the Indian ecosystem for uncrewed or unmanned systems and unmanned weapon equipped platforms is quite dramatic. And if you've attended any of these Swavlamban variety of or IDEX varieties of activities, you will see the number of startups that are pushing and begging for for mechanisms by which they can go up in scale. So why are we doing all this? We're doing all this because it allows us to maximize the available expenditure that we're making on our platforms to have multiple non-manned areas and concentrate our manpower in those areas that we need to concentrate them. Some things cannot be done by drones. Some things require human beings. Some interventions require human beings. Even if the drone could do it, if you had a lethal autonomous weapon system, for example, you want to make sure that there is a man in the loop, or at least a man on the loop. You don't want the whole system to be totally autonomous, because
You don't want a software taking a life and death decision, sir.
we certainly don't. Do you? Nobody does.
Nobody does.
So as a consequence, the unmanned elements or the uncrewed elements of the Navy are going to increase, as they are going to increase in the Air Force, as they're going to increase in the Army. The fact that unlike in, say, for example, some small country with very low manpower, it is not going to be, it is not neither desirable nor possible for India to simply say we're not going to do anything in terms of military activity, and that these unmanned systems or uncrewed systems are going to do it for us. We will have to find a balance, and this balance will be found in the effort that we are currently putting in all three services into manned-unmanned teaming, MUMTE, or perhaps in the future there might even be unmanned teaming. I don't know. But manned-unmanned teaming is certainly an area that we need to be.
The Air Force is doing it, sir.
The Air Force is doing it. The Army is doing it.
Yes, sir.
And the Navy is certainly doing it as well.
So do you see, sir, you have commanded an aircraft carrier. Do you see in the near future, sir, an unmanned, let us say, Rafale or something like that?
Of course.
Unmanned, taking off and landing.
Remember that aircraft carrier doesn't necessarily mean that or predicate the fact that the aircraft has to be manned. The aircraft carrier is required. What it carries is what type of aircraft it carries, and that applies equally to lighter than aircraft. In your mind, as soon as you think of aircraft, you think of Rafale. But I can think of areas there. Didn't the Chinese balloon over the USA spook everybody?
Yes, it did, sir.
And so there are many things that are possible at sea, and the only thing that limits us in our development of these processes is really our imagination. And Indians are known for many things, but lack of imagination is not one of them. So we are a proud and a powerful nation. Our biggest imagination repository is what? Human beings.
Yes, sir.
Machines can't imagine. Human beings have to imagine. And as human beings imagine, this imagination will allow ships which were otherwise predicated upon beliefs that they had to be manned, to be both manned and unmanned. So I can certainly see a future, in the near future, where a given aircraft carrier will have both manned aircraft as well as unmanned aircraft. And whether you do that as a loyal wingman kind of approach, or you do it as purely a unmanned approach or purely a manned approach, will depend on the situation. But that's where it's going.
Thank you very much for talking to us, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, a very, very interesting conversation with Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan. And he spoke about so many things. We spoke about the Great Nicobar Project. We spoke about Rafales and Poseidons and weapon platforms, and why the Indian Navy is such a strategic force to reckon with. I hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll be back soon again with a very special guest. Till then, Jai Hind.